You're watching Daybreak. Thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. With me in studio is an esteemed panel. James Odongo is the Chief Administrative Officer, the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO. Dr. William Ojwang is the World Wildlife Fund Lead, Freshwater Lead, and Ernest Chicheti is the Corporate Affairs Manager at the Kenya Climate Innovation Center. Evelyn Njuguna is the Marketing and Communications Executive at ERIHAP Kenya, the only lady so far here on the broadcast who balances us off. Dr. Ojwang, coming to you. Talking about, and this is within your domain, of diminishing natural resources. Is this a theme around ecosystem restoration coined in regards to instances that are happening in contemporary world, contemporary Kenya and contemporary Africa, given that the history given of the first ever such conference on environment is still the question of the natural environment and the natural ecosystem seems to be taking the heavy brunt of growing human population and its diminishing effect. Does this theme inform what seems to be an underpinning problem that has not been substantively addressed since the first Convention on Environment?
Thank you. Thank you. Certainly, I hear your concern because we've talked about increasing population. We're talking about a country that almost 80% is already categorized as arid or semi-arid. Mm-hmm. And yet, majority of Kenyans depend on natural resources. And that means we depend on ecosystem, mm-hmm. functions, and services. This became really apparent during the COVID period. I don't know if we do forget really, really fast. But at a point where people went to an extent of hoarding oxygen cylinders, we take it for granted, the oxygen that we breathe. That is part of the ecosystem services. Mm-hmm. At that time, Kenyans were looking, where do we get enough water? Because we needed to wash our hands. Kenya is a water-scarce country. Mm-hmm. Again, that is ecosystem service. How do we enhance these ecosystem services, given what we're having, what we're experiencing at the moment is climate change? So this is really, really important. And the best that we can do is to support, promote sustainable natural resources management. At WWF, our mission is to stop the natural environment, the degradation of the natural environment, mm-hmm. and build a society where we can live in harmony with nature. And we are delivering on that particular mission. Okay. And that mission has become really, really apparent at the moment, where there's really need for us to take a look at the services, the ecosystem services that we depend on, and seeing how do we sustainably enhance these ecosystems. And therefore the theme this particular year, that is land restoration, desertification, yeah. as well as resilience. Mm-hmm. It's really time to rethink of what can we do differently going forward, now that we depend on ecosystem services. I come back to what my colleague talked about. We have land that we need to budget with, mm-hmm. okay? And that means that we need to embrace spatial planning, budgeting with our land. How do we utilize our land? After the Constitution 2010, we developed the County Act, mm-hmm. 2012, which required each of the counties in Kenya to actually develop spatial plans. And that was supposed to guide equitable socioeconomic development in this country. Many counties have already developed some of these spatial plans, of course, some with the support from WWF Kenya. Okay. And here is an opportunity where we're going to look at this country and see where do we undertake development activities so that Kenyans don't, settle in areas that are prone to floods?
Okay.
And then knee-jerk reaction. The principle of precautionary principle.
Okay, okay.
Why would people settle, for instance, areas that are prone to mudslides, for instance?
Or riparian land.
Or riparian land. So that spatial plan is supposed to guide on how we settle, how we go about our social economic development, and then using that as a tool to safeguard those ecosystems that are really, really important, whether they're forests, whether they're rangelands, whether they're freshwater ecosystems, whether it's marine or marine ecosystems.
Okay.
That is how we need to go back to that and ensure that that is really what is guiding our socio-economic development going forward and securing these key ecosystem services and functions going forward.
Okay. Well, we'll come to the water aspect, because the scarcity I've talked about needs then a solution, an answer, and how we can then preserve our water catchment areas. For example, the Mau Forest, which is a livelihood, which is the lungs, basically, of our country, the breathing part, and the dependence that more than the millions of Kenyans have on it, and also downstream, up to the extent that it feeds into the people downstream up to Lake Victoria, and then up to Lake Victoria informs the Nile River, the consequences this will have on the pathway of the river up to Sudan and to Egypt, and the net effect and the ripple effect this will have when we talk about water scarcity and what needs to be fixed. But coming to you, James Odongo, given what you have talked about, as an organization then, how do you advocate, how do you push for responsible practices here? And in that course, are there success stories that you can point out?
Okay. Thank you once again, Ayub. So just to give you a bit of history with respect to the formation of the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, there was a ban of the single-use plastic bags back in 2017. And that prompted a conversation, because increasingly we were seeing an appetite by the government to ban material or other products that were deemed to be stubborn to the environment. So, of course, through a private sector-led initiative by different actors, including the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, there was that appreciation that the private sector now needed to take charge, and in this case, you're talking about the manufacturers, to take charge of the resultant effects of their products. With that, then we developed the first business model for a producer responsibility organization. And, of course, now we started our operations in 2021. So in the context of what we are doing to try and encourage meaningful discussions on environmental stewardship, in addition to now putting in place mechanisms for tracking of products and packaging material through the life cycle. So initially, Kenya has predominantly been a linear economy, where Ayub goes to the shop, buys their bread, then disposes of the packaging. But now what we are trying to encourage is adoption of a recycling ecosystem, where we are now going to be seeing Ayub taking charge of this packaging and disposing it in the right place. And then the brand owner of this particular packaging will be able to now feed it into the ecosystem as far as recycling is concerned. Then separately, and in addition to now encouraging recycling, we also now are trying to look at other aspects of resource efficiency. So first is reduction of an unnecessary packaging. So ordinarily you would find some products being quote-unquote overpackaged. But now we would want to start encouraging and working with our members to try and see how are we able to minimize the environmental impact of your packaging by reducing the content of your packaging material. Then finally now we are seeing a discussion and of course encouraging discussions amongst our members on issues on design for recyclability. So before, and if I can take you back, we used to have, say for instance, the margarine being packaged in aluminum packaging. That was highly recyclable. But then we are seeing some transition to what we are seeing as we are calling packaging that is non-recyclable or composite. So that is what you ordinarily see in the environment. And so ours is to try and encourage that design for recyclability, design change towards more efficient packaging materials. And then With respect to now, what you're asking about, whether we have had any success story.
Yeah.
So since we started in 2021 to date, through the support of our members in terms of the contribution they make as far as the volumes they're putting out into the market is concerned, to date we have managed to collect and recycle over 16,000 metric tons of plastic packaging, and that would have ordinarily gone out into the environment. And just to also help you paint a picture or appreciate how that is impactful, is that, for instance, in Nairobi, we are generating up to 3,000 metric tons of waste per day. Anywhere between 40 to 30% is plastic waste. So we believe that is quite critical in terms of the success of what we have been able to do.
All right.
We've also been able to, of course, now establish a new ecosystem around recycling. So you're seeing more jobs being created. We are seeing heavy investments in recycling thanks to the efforts of KEPRO and, of course, by extension, the regulatory transition that has been made in that respect.
Ernest Chicheti,
yes.
Given that one of the other thematic areas that the event in Saudi Arabia will be about is the building of drought resilience, and that's where we were largely during the many months of the year 2023 and early 2024. What will interventions of resilience building look like in that regard of the drought period that the UN now says after the long rains, inevitably we are going to be stepping into?
Yes, so I think if we look at it globally and even locally, you realize these cycles keep reoccurring, where you have a lot of rain like now, and then now thereafter you have long periods of drought. So in terms of building resilience, and I'll just go back to what my colleague mentioned. One is that we already have the water that has gone down. If there's a way that we could have harvested that water early in advance through proper planning, then by the time the flood comes or the drought comes, we already have some reservoirs that then help us to cushion us during that particular period. But that having maybe not happened, there are other solutions that then we need to look at. So, for example, if we are looking at farmers who still need to build a lot of resilience, then there are new ways of doing it where, one, you could, through our center, we've supported organizations that have developed like drought-tolerant varieties, which then can be planted during those particular periods, and they'll cushion people from failed harvest. Yeah. You could also look at solutions where you could also have maybe early maturing varieties. And these early maturing varieties will need shorter periods of time, and then farmers still are able to harvest some crop and enhance food security. But also,
are there specific areas when it comes to those drought? You talked about the seeds that drought resilient. Are there specific areas in terms of targeting and their approach, because different parts of the country experience the severity is different across different parts of the country? So in terms of the specification.
Yes. So you'll find most of these are targeted mainly to arid and semi-arid area. And as it has been mentioned, if you look at map out Kenya, almost 80% of it is actually arid or semi-arid. So a big portion of that, of these varieties are actually targeted in those areas. We are looking the areas in eastern Kenya, northern Kenya, part of Coast Province. Those are the areas that are mostly affected. And even if you move now to parts of Western and Nyanza, you'll find the areas within those particular ecosystems that are actually now classified as semi-arid areas. So this type of variety are actually targeted within those particular areas. Then also, some of the things that we're also promoting within the center is to see then how do we provide alternative feeds for animals. Okay. Because during good times, you'll find either we have harvested maize, there's a lot of grass. We can encourage farmers to to stock that, and that could also help them in terms of drought resilience. If that is not working, then there could be other innovative ways that then we are also promoting. For example, through use of hydroponic systems, where you can then now plant fodder without necessarily relying on soil, and where you use very little water, but still you're able to feed your animals. We're also encouraging things like now culling, where you see if you know that maybe during the rain season I can keep 100 animals, but during drought season, if I don't maybe sell some of them and maybe save that amount of money, then I may end up losing the whole herd. So you may decide that since we know that a drought will occur, then you sell part of it, and that's what we're encouraging them to sell and then save, and then keep a small number of animals that they're able to feed within their available resources. So then that way you're also building resilience within those particular communities. So there are a number of innovations that actually we are looking at, and actually a good example is IRRIHAB, which is seated over here, and they also went through our hub. Okay. And that's how they came up with that system where now you are using drip irrigation. It uses less water, and it helps farmers then now save on water rather than the conventional one where you are using a lot of water.
Does that resilience also encompass the awareness around the commercialization aspect of livestock, for example? When I have more than, say, 50 camels and 40 goats and a number of, let's say, 50 cows, and then so all of us, let's say 5 of us here, then grazing in a small space, the density aspect of empowering them on the commercialization part of making some money out of this in paying school fees and attending to some other livelihoods, because in the end is that when there is no such messaging, it tends that the drought will wipe out the entire animal population, is it? And do you reach out also to them with regards to that?
Yes, we normally reach out to them, and I think what my colleague mentioned about spatial planning is normally very key. And these messages normally are passed on through the county communication channels, because you'll find, you may find an area where maybe if we are 5 communities, and maybe that area can only accommodate maybe, for example, 100 herds of cattle. But you have, let's say, 300. So if you have 300, then for sure land degradation will happen, because now you have a capacity of what the land can actually handle. So normally it's about how do you plan, how much can you keep. And you see, the aspect of it is normally in terms of economic activities. It's just not about prestige. How do I keep these animals, for example, and then I can use them to sustain my livelihood? So, for example, if I go to Isiolo, where we also operate, one of the things that we've encouraged them to do is look at a camel not just as an animal they'll keep for prestige, but then now start also doing value addition in terms of like dairy from camel milk. So you see, that way then they're able to get more income rather than just looking at a camel maybe for meat and other things. So those value addition things are the ones that now we are trying to build within them. Okay. Also looking at it, yes, you keep maybe camel in Northeastern, but you could also have a chicken, for example. Okay. Traditionally, they never used to keep, for example, chicken. But you see, during drought season, chicken may still survive, and it will provide you an alternative livelihood. So that way, then you are building resilience within those communities.
All right. Evelyn, looking at the Economic Survey report of 2023, much of the GDP growth, our GDP growth, is attributed to the agriculture sector, which has performed, and this is again attributed further to the rains that we have had, which was sufficient to boost our production in terms of our food capacity. But given that this is an agriculture system that's more dependent on rain-fed or the rains, and the zigzag in the weather patterns that we have, which are unpredictable in the event that there's going to be drought, what then can happen in terms of adaptation here and your advocacy with regards to irrigation? Then what's the alternative, and ending the wholesale dependency on rain-fed agriculture? What can be done? What are the alternatives to look into?
Yes, actually at IRRIHAB we normally have a tagline that we say that plants need water, they don't need rain. So you find most farmers are dependent on rain-fed agriculture, which is honestly quite sad because with the intense climate change, you find the rainfall cannot be dependent on. So you find this farmer cannot grow their crops throughout the year. So what we normally advocate is for farmers to harvest the rainwater. And then if you are in a region where you can be able to maybe dig a borehole, use that water, pump that water from the borehole and irrigate your land, you can as well go use that alternative. Or if you have an alternative of maybe a river or any other water source that is near you, you can use that to irrigate your land. Farmers really have to deviate from the mentality of depending on rain-fed agriculture, because you find with these patterns that keep on shifting, you really can't depend, because you find, for example, in the past few months when we had intensive rains, farmers who maybe were in regions such as Machakos or let's say the arid and semi-arid regions, really, were the ones supplying the highland regions, because now they were really flooded. They could not grow their crops. Some of their crops were swept off by water. So what we normally do, we advocate for a balance. In this respect, I mean is, for example, we are running a project that is dubbed as the Legend Project. This is running in the Lake region. So we are advising farmers in the Lake region, because they have the water, the resources and the land, to grow high-value crops such as onions. Now, those onions they cannot quite perform in the regions where there is little to close to no water, such as the northeastern, where there is little water. So these regions, the Lake regions, can provide the high-value crops to the semi-arid, the ASALS regions, that is the arid and semi-arid regions. And now for the arid and semi-arid regions, they can grow crops that do not require a lot of water. Now, for those regions, they can grow something like, let's say, vegetables, and then they use solutions such as the solar dryers, where they dry those vegetables, remove the water, it reduces the amount of water that is in the vegetables, thus prolonging the shelf life of that crop, and they can now distribute that crop towards this other side. So it's like an exchange program, if I'd call it that. Okay. Yes, so you find there's a striking balance across the whole country, where we don't find agriculture is only practiced in the highland regions, but also in the ASAL regions.
Given that, because this has been one very big problem, especially within the northeastern region, I mean, many people normally ask, how then a county like Garissa, which is which borders on River Tana and the river passes there, at times there are complaints about food security. What can be done to make use of the river for irrigation purposes, especially? Do you have programs extended towards there as well in terms of your coverage? Because even during the drought period, despite the lessening of the volume of the water in the waters in the river, still there is water. But the people there complain about lack of water, even from their taps in home for basic use, like washing their utensils and doing the other house chores.
Yes, actually the main problem with farmers in this region is normally not the availability of water. It's how they will get that water to their farms. Because you find somebody who is like 500 or 100 kilometers away from the river, they cannot be able to quite get that water to their farms, right? So you provide solutions that can be able to help these farmers get that water to their farms. For instance, we are running a project that is funded in Tana River, actually, where we are providing solar pumps. These solar pumps are able to help farmers pump water from the river into to where they have digged their water pans. Now they pump that water to there, and then now they can be able to supply the water to their farms. Because it's not normally a matter of the availability of water. Maybe that it's bringing that water to the farms to be able to irrigate the crops. And now once they have that water in their water pans, they're supposed to maximize that water because it's not a lot. So how they're supposed to maximize this water is by using systems such as the drip irrigation system. The drip irrigation system is where there's a pipe that has, this is the best way I can explain it, that has tiny holes, so it removes water in drops. So you find that this farmer does not really need to use a lot of water to irrigate their farms, really. So they save water by around 50%. That leads to making the farmer be able to use this water for a prolonged period. Yes.
Okay, and shortly we're going to be taking the feedback and get to some of the questions also from the public. As I get to you, Dr. William Ojwang, and is the expansion of infrastructure development a threat to natural ecosystems?
Thank you. Before I respond to that, which is really, really important, because we are looking at a country that is also thinking of, being industrialized not long from now. But I want to just contribute to what my two colleagues have talked about, particularly in the region, the northern part of Kenya that we are talking about. We need also to take advantage of indigenous knowledge that is quickly disappearing. People have lived in some of these places for such a long time. And just using indigenous knowledge, they knew where to go and when. Areas that you would live secure, so that during a drought, those are the areas that will support, say, your livestock. So we need to map all these and be able to take advantage of that information. And then we promote, grazing plans, so that people move from one place to another depending on when will it rain next. And they have internalized that. That really helps. So take advantage of local solutions. And I think we have programs now, one funded by the World Bank, the FLOCA, we are listening to people and taking advantage of what they know and building on that, instead of, copy and pasting sometimes.
Yeah.
In terms of agriculture is the biggest threat to, say, our natural resources, whether it is encroachment into the forest, whether encroachment to riparian areas, over obstruction for irrigation. But then, can they see the need of, we don't have as much water? So that governance becomes very, very important. Can we share the little that we have? When do I water my crops?
You said agriculture is a threat to our natural ecosystem?
Agriculture, particularly unsustainable agriculture, is a threat to our natural resources. Encroachment into, forest areas, riparian areas.
And agriculture as well is one of the biggest contributors to our GDP growth and food supplication.
So we need...
So there's the aspect you are talking about of regulation and proper monitoring mechanisms that ought to be provided by the government, which at the moment seems to be absent, is it?
So you're right to some extent. For instance, extension services are gone.
Okay.
I know the counties are working really, really hard to ensure that they empower people to be able to support smallholder farmers, for instance. Because if that doesn't happen, then we'll still have some of these problems of obstruction. People watering their crops at midday, and you don't know how much that crop really requires. People using excessive fertilizer, excessive pesticides, all this impact on our water quality, for instance. Don't we see the need of soil testing, for instance, so that we know, what does my soil require? Is this the type of fertilizer I require for my soil? For the soil and for the crops? So for instance, we import fertilizer. This country has different soil composition. We need to know, so this area, what kind of input do we require? So soil mapping then becomes very, very important. Terracing, contour farming. If these things are not embraced, if we don't empower our people to understand how they can even shift from subsistence to agribusiness, because that is what is sustainable, and that is how we can remove people from poverty to really a better life. But I want to come back to the question of infrastructure. And this goes back to what I talked about, spatial planning, budgeting the land, so that as a county, how are we managing the land that we have? Do we need an industrial area, for instance? And for what in particular? So that when an investor goes to a county, it's not about, that's the time to look for what land, but spatial planning is giving an opportunity to people to visualize where they want to go within the next 10 years. And then planning and saying, you know what, this is what we need in this particular county. Because this is what we have in the county. This is the agricultural production that we have. And therefore, we need to support, say, a setup, industrial setup. But where? The roads. We have to understand that there are those national roads.
Okay.
Are they going to pass through a particular area? And how do we safeguard some of these areas? So we have to be alive to the fact that, yes, we need development, but not development that will have negative impact on the ecosystems that we are talking about.
Does that include the extractive industries? Or even the investments that you talked about, the need for proper regulation, even as they are allowed with the proper spatial planning, still the extraction part of ensuring that they don't have a negative bearing on our ecosystem and environment?
Absolutely, and for sure, Kenya, we have made strides when it comes to enabling environment. We have done really well. Neighboring countries come to benchmark and quickly implement some of our laws, regulations, and all that. We need to just ensure that not just laws and regulations, but they're implemented. I think that is where we have a concern. We come up with good laws, but are they implemented? If you look at some of the acts, they're being repealed, being reviewed. They're not fully implemented, including the Water Act 2016. So implementation then becomes a problem. And that is how we can safeguard, the social and environmental safeguard. Really, really important. And most of our laws and regulations are adhering to those social and environmental safeguards.
Okay.
And us as a lobbying, as a CSO,
yes,
it's upon us to build that narrative around the need, really, to secure our environment, because that is where the future is.
Okay, thank you. James, coming to you before we sample the feedback. There is a proposal in the Finance Bill 2024 of the introduction of eco-levy tax.
Yes.
What are the likely implications here, even as we talk about the need for restoration, conservation efforts, building drought resilience? I mean, how impactful will this be?
Okay, thank you. And you're sort of building to what Dr. Ojwang is mentioning, is that we have a knack for proposing laws that sometimes are bigger than we can be able to achieve. So the eco-levy tax, this is a proposition from the National Treasury to Parliament through the Finance and Economic Planning Committee. And it is essentially trying to sort of propose that producers and manufacturers should be able to take liability for the environmental impact of their products. Nevertheless, we are worried. First of all, the propositions are coming at a time when we also have the Sustainable Waste Management Act, which under Section 13 is introducing the extended producer responsibility, that in a sense is similar to what the eco-levy tax is looking at achieving. Nevertheless, EPR and best practices across the globe has shown that taking environmental responsibility for product impact is usually a private sector-driven initiative.
Okay.
But in this case, the National Treasury wants it to be a levy charged on importation and, of course, locally produced goods, charged at a rate of 150 shillings per kg. So we've done our own estimates, and working with the private sector, the incremental effect in terms of what would be charged if the private sector was to take up this implementation of EPR as an independent initiative, the prices of good, incremental increase in prices of good would be anywhere between 0.1% to 10% for certain items. But the provisions around the eco-levy tax, you're looking at certain consumer goods getting to as high as 70% in terms of the incremental increase, because at 0.1, between 0.1 to 10%, most producers will be able to absorb this cost. But now where you're proposing quite a number of, so in addition to the eco-levy tax, you are aware that the finance bill is proposing a raft of other changes. So introduction of 25% on edible oils and the like. So the compounding effect is that some products will actually get to 70% in terms of price increase. So in terms of the consumer taking up this cost, that is a debate for another day, because it's touching on the very critical resources and products that our common households use every other day. Now, in terms of sector-specific impacts, the progress that has been made since the enactment of the Sustainable Waste Management Act 2022 to date, we are looking at the reversal of the gains made. So you're looking at potential losing of 100,000 jobs. That is within the packaging industry. Yeah. You're looking at the recycling ecosystem. So you'll notice that some recyclers employ directly anywhere between 10 to 100 people. Indirectly, that could get to 1,000 people.
And this is as a result of the proposals as contained in the bill?
Yes, if it is to go through on the 150 shillings per kg, we're estimating anywhere between 100,000 plus job losses. Okay, and stakeholders are appearing before the Kuria Kimani-led Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly. Yes. Have you appeared? If so, have you made these concerns before the committee? Not yet. We've not yet appeared, but we've raised certain fundamental issues. Yeah. And of course, as I said, one would be the incremental effect on the prices of goods, the potential impact on the issue of job losses. And then, of course, they're proposing that the finance, or rather the eco-levy tax should take effect from 1st July. If you go back to our constitution, Article 43 on issues around economic rights and social rights, that in itself is a travesty of justice and might be quite difficult for producers and manufacturers to be able to comply with such orders. Then another provision, and quite counterproductive, you're introducing an eco-levy tax. Then on this other end, you are withdrawing the exemptions on VAT for importation of plants and machinery for recycling. So we are wondering, then if you're charging to try and take care of the environmental effect of packaging, and on this other hand, you are killing the recycling industry that has seen a lot of investments in the past few years by removing the VAT exemptions.
All right, let's now take a look at the sample. Mr. Chete, I'll come to you afterwards and see if there are any questions and equally the contributions by the members of the public watching this broadcast. The first one from Godi Barasa, where it says, for us to be in absolute harmony with our environment, we must endeavor against all odds to reduce the carbon footprint, protect all riparian lands, and discourage activities that will lead to concrete jungles back in our counties. Sawe says ecosystem restoration is key to a sustainable future. By restoring natural habitats, we enhance biodiversity, combat climate change, and secure resources for generations to come. Let's take action today for a healthier planet tomorrow. Oweke Ojuang says ecosystem restoration is not only key to realizing food and water security, among other benefits, but also plays a crucial role in addressing climate change and preserving biodiversity. Krypton Consult says Kenya's economy depends on climate-sensitive and nature-based sectors which are under threat due to human activity and climate change. Biodiversity and ecosystems conservation are key. Bob Otieno Owino says the government has not done much to educate Kenyans about World Environment Day, hence majority are not aware of this special day will be marked on the 5th of every month, just a day, and it's always annually. Nature Maingi says it's really difficult to achieve sustainable development when we have population growing. Basically, we have limited resources with growing consumption. And the last one here comes from Babu Michelle K. says the World Environment Day in this century should be themed towards afforestation, more so targeting climate change mitigations. Climate change is the elephant in the room right now. It's no secret all over the world. We must be dynamic. Chete, coming to you, there is an appreciation of the significance of this day, and we talked about the theme and its relevance in today's world. Another key aspect is land restoration. I mean, from the perspective of the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, how can that be undertaken? Because it's equally a key component and a contributor to the discussion that we are having here.
Yes, so in terms of land restoration, actually the basic thing is about what I mentioned earlier. How do we use our land? And I think there have also been discussion on this table in terms of that particular use and what we need to use on that particular land. So when we are talking about land restoration, is looking at it in terms of is this land enough or good enough to sustain sustainable production? So that should be the beginning point. Do we want to measure the pH levels of our land? Do we want to know the minerals that are there? What do we need to do to enhance land restoration? So looking at it broadly, you look at it from, if I'm a smallholder farmer and I've been using chemical fertilizer for a very long time, I've not done my soil test to know what type of fertilizer do I need. Or do I need to change and maybe now move to organic fertilizer? So if I move to organic fertilizer, then that will help in terms of my land restoration. If you're looking also in terms of the rangelands, where we are doing large-scale farming, there are also wildlife, how do you do restoration? How do you manage the population in those areas? If you're looking at our coastal areas, where we have the mangroves and all that we are also cutting down, how do we restore those areas? Because they are a good buffer for our environment. Looking at the water catchment areas, how do we restore the water catchment areas in our country, the water towers? So it is a broader discussion that we need to look at, basically because land now is very limited. So we still need to be very food secure to ensure that the little land that we have is able to feed the growing population. It is able to supply the industries for economic activities. We should be able to abstract, for example, even the minerals where you are. But once you've abstracted, then what do we need to do with that land? How do we restore it back to its natural position? So those are the discussions that we need to have, and a part of it will actually call for a bit of legislation, where we need to put in policies that then prescribe how do I use that land, and then once I'm done using it, what do I need to do to restore it back to its natural position. Okay,
and it's key because you have mentioned the need for the restoration in the context of the probably arable land available for farming and the production of food. But Evelyn, then when 80% of the country's landmass is arid and semi-arid, does it then mean that it's of no use? And if there are alternatives, what are the options on the table to also utilize on the lands in the arid and semi-arid areas of the country or the counties? I mean, what can be done there in terms of the production of food? And how do you intervene as a player from ERIHAB?
Yes, most of the land in Kenya is arid and semi-arid, but also this land is quite arable. It still can produce food because you find a country like Egypt or Israel, they're still producing even with the conditions that they still have. We have solutions that can be replaced or can be used as an alternative to these regions. For instance, an area where you can be able to use something like a greenhouse and use, instead of using the soil, or if their soil is quite acidic or it's not convenient to grow crops, you can use something like pumice. Pumice is a substitute of soil. So with pumice, you add nutrients to it. So with this, farmers can be able to still grow their crops and still be able to measure the amount of water that they are using towards these crops. Because you find most farmers actually just irrigate or use water that is available to the maximum point. For instance, what my colleague was saying, somebody could water their crops like 3 or 4 times in a day, whereas you're just only required to water like twice a day. So also it's a matter of bridging or creating capacity building and also bridging that knowledge gap to farmers, being able to educate them of these alternatives so that they can be able to be resilient to the climate change. And also in these regions where it's arid or semi-arid, they could also be encouraged to grow crops that are resilient to that kind of an environment. For instance, if a person who is in an arid or semi-arid region can be able to grow oranges or can be able to grow mangoes, which don't require quite a lot of water to grow, they can still replace that instead of growing a crop that requires intense water intake here. So from where we sit, we have solutions to curb this intense climate climate effects for farmers. An alternative also maybe for a farmer who is in an arid region where there is extreme temperatures and cannot use a greenhouse, they could replace that with a shed house. A shed house is a house built with a shade net. So it still serves as a greenhouse, but now the rate at which the temperature in the shade house is, as compared to the greenhouse, is quite lower. So they could use these alternative solutions. And also, I think it's also a matter of also the government coming in to supporting these farmers, because you find some of these solutions for smallholder farmers are quite expensive. So for instance, for farmers who are in groups or cooperatives such as CBOs or self-help groups, they could be supported, maybe given one shade house to grow their crops as a group.
And Dr. Ojwang, earlier on you talked about the scarcity of water in the country, and the appalling thing about it is that our water catchment areas are under constant threat from human settlements and also what you mentioned as uncontrolled agriculture. Then how do we also conserve our fresh water catchment areas? Because if that dies, then we risk suffocation, for we are affecting our own lungs.
Sure. Water certainly is really, really important. And that's why we have, arid and semi-arid areas. And for sure, one thing that just came to mind, they're compatible investments. So it may not just be agricultural production per se. 70% of our livestock is where? It's in that particular area. So a critical value chain. Wildlife ranges. Today, it's probably in the northern Kenya. How do we secure this so that we even have twin sources of income in this particular region? So compatible investments then becomes very, very important, not necessarily agricultural production where you're not able to grow tomatoes, for instance. But coming back to catchment management, it's really, really important. And the best way of doing this is, one, empowering communities to take responsibility, because that is where they live. We have people joining Water Users Association at sub-catchment level, and they develop plans. The only challenge is they don't have resources to implement some of these plans. And these plans are aimed at restoring, conserving key water source areas for the good of all of us as a country. So what sometimes you refer to as green infrastructure, those areas that can be replanted, restored, with trees, so be it. The areas that doesn't require, it's just securing and allowing for natural regeneration. That's securing those catchments. But that is the key water source areas up in the catchment. But then there's the Mildo region, where we have their sustainable practices that we're talking about. Then, of course, downstream. And as an organization, as WWF Kenya, and part of the World Environment Day, last year, we had a journey of water where people walked from the catchment downstream for 3 days.
Including you?
Yes, I did.
And what were the observations that you made?
So some of these negative human-related activities that are impacting on the environment. So encroachment to the riparian areas, encroachment to the key water source areas. People going to having intakes, multiple intakes, no coordinated access to water. We have sand mining in some places, over obstruction, as we have talked about. But this time around, as part of this need to amplify our voices, to turn the beam on the negative things that we're doing, we have yet another annual Journey of Water. And this time around, this annual Journey of Water will be held in Kisumu, on a river, along a river that comes from Vihiga and Nandi and downstream into Kisumu. This is a source of water for residents of Kisumu. It's interesting to note that because of unsustainable catchment management, degradation of the catchment, Kisumu City get water from, not from the Lake Victoria, the largest freshwater lake.
It's a freshwater lake.
In the tropics. They get water from It's called the Kajulu intake, which is on Kibos River. Why? Because of catchment degradation. Do you know that we'll not be able to secure Lake Victoria, which is a key resource in the region, if we don't pay attention to catchment management? Remember the issue of water hyacinth?
Yeah.
Why was it doing so well? Because we are feeding it with all the fertilizer, all the soil that comes from the catchment is what is leading to some fish kills in Lake Victoria. So the future of some of these water bodies, including Lake Naivasha, Lake Baringo, depend on how we are managing our catchment.
Okay, so in that journey, Daktari,
yes,
you began from where?
We'll be walking from...
No, not the Kisumu one.
Yeah.
The previous one.
The previous...
Where you have observed sand mining, encroachments, and multiple agriculture practices which are uncontrolled. So where did you begin?
This one began in Meru. This was along Ewaso Nyiro North.
Okay.
And it was actually on the 6th of June last year. From the source of one of the tributaries of Ewaso Nyiro North.
Okay.
In Meru.
Okay.
Walked through Laikipia, went down to Isiolo, past Archer's Post, all the way down into Samburu, the county of Samburu. And that was, we went along with some of your media colleagues came along. We had the county government representative, national government representatives led by Water Resources Authority. And what we were doing was looking at, so what are some of these things that we need to take into consideration, that we need to commit to addressing? Remember collective action on water.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we sat and reflected. The end, which was the third day, we sat in Isiolo and reflected on what we had seen. And people committed. The Water Users Association committed on what they would want to do going forward. The county governments did commit on what they wanted to do going forward. Us as CSOs did commit. The media have done really, really well to amplify some of these concerns, and for sure these are being addressed. And this journey of water is heavily being funded from the Dutch Embassy in Kenya, supporting the project that we're implementing, which is Catchment to Tap.
Okay.
And it's all about, again, the journey of water. Coming back to the journey of water. What is the journey of water?
Okay.
It's all about catchment to tap.
So it's and the picture you painted of your previous work is grim. And this year you have talked about the fact that the residents of Kisumu County, if these catchment areas are not properly preserved and interventions made, they are on the brink of water scarcity as well. You talked about also the water hyacinth problem, the aquatic life, which is by extension also affected, and how this is having a geopolitical effect to the extent that there was standoff between Egypt and Ethiopia because of the Grand Renaissance Dam that Ethiopians constructed, which is meant to divert water from the Nile River, the sources like Victoria, and then which means if these catchment areas are not protected, further consequences will be downstream up to a continental level.
Yep.
So do you think, from your observation of what you had seen from your previous work, the plan you are working today, that there is goodwill from agencies to forestall all these problems that are on the brink of happening?
There's goodwill.
Briefly, as I go to Odongo.
Yeah, there's that goodwill. I think we just need to do a little more. Remember, we had a water access and sanitation investment not long ago. But we saw a situation where we're probably prioritizing investment, downstream investment, water access and sanitation, as opposed to prioritizing catchment management.
Thank you.
Remember I mentioned RUA's developing sub-catchment management plans, but they don't have resources to implement those. Okay. So there's that goodwill from what we have seen during the journey of waters, but there's room to improve and work across sectors.
Okay.
Everybody coming in to join and be able to really prioritize water resource management. Yeah. Because as I said, Kenya will not realize the Vision 2030 and even the bottom-up transformational agenda if we don't pay attention to catchment management and therefore water resources management.
Yes, James, your final word, please.
Yeah.
Okay. My final word, I think, would be, if you listened to Ernest, Evelyn, and Dr. Ojong, is that the environmental effects actually targeting, and sorry to use the tired word of mama mbogas and the common mananchi. And so the conversation we should now look at demystifying what is the role of myself, yourself, and the Kenyan citizenry as far as issues on climate change mitigation and adaptation are concerned. And of course, now try to get it to levels of making it attractive, either commercialization or by any means trying to encourage environmental stewardship at individual level. So you'd be seeing issues around community policing and taking up adaptive approaches at neighborhood levels, to, which of course will have a compounding effect as far as environmental protection is concerned in the long run.
Okay, thank you. 30 seconds, please. Ernest Chicheti.
Yeah, I think for me the big take will be how do we then embrace innovations in combating climate change, and then calling on all of us and asking ourselves what future do you want to bestow to the future generation. So it's upon us to ensure that we leave for them a sustainable world, and so let's embrace sustainable development moving forward.
Okay. Yes, Evelyn.
Yes, my final word would be together we can be able to achieve a sustainable future by adapting to regenerative practices, agricultural practices, and we will be able to fight this climate change. Yeah.
Your time is all appreciated, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming here on the broadcast. James Odongo is the Chief Administrative Officer, the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization, KEPRO. Thank you so much. Dr. William Ojwang is the World Wildlife Fund Freshwater Lead. Your time is appreciated. Ernest Chicheti is the Corporate Affairs Manager, the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, KCIC. And Evelyn Njuguna is the Marketing and Communication Executive at IRIHAB Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making time. Thank you as well for waking up with us here on the broadcast and your contributions here on Daybreak. Your time is all appreciated, and many thanks for the feedback. I am Ayub Abdikadir. I'll be up next is Health and Lifestyle with Safin Achieng Oma. Thanks for watching.